This is a video to explain the permissions and visibility settings that allow you to control the access of many different types of information in the database. You will find these settings scattered all throughout the system. I will explain the simple settings that almost everyone will use first. Then I'll get into some of the more complicated permission settings in case you feel like you're up for the task of making those adjustments. So let's get started by going to Database Administration and the section that pretty much everybody will want to use as far as these settings are concerned, and that is going to the service types and controlling which of these items in your list of services will be visible for which staff. So let's say these legal services, right now these two legal services are set to be visible for all users, but we want to change that. We only want the legal program to be able to see those services in their list. So we're going to click on that item to edit it, and you'll have this variable visible for, and we can switch this to a certain group of people or individual people. So let's go through what you'll see here. The first option here, and that's the default, is all users. So this item will be visible for all users. Or you can specify, I only want this item to be visible for users who have permission to the Residential Program 1 and Residential Program 2. And we can delete those to start over. All right, so in this exact case, we would say only the users with access to the legal program should see this item in their list. So this means anytime you add a new legal program staff, you won't have to go through and say, I want them to see this item, or this or that. The system will know the fact that they are in the legal program means they should be able to have all these permission settings that are set for anyone in the legal program. You also may see the option of designating certain items to be visible by a certain user group. Not every site has these options. If you do want to be able to designate staff across different groups that are different than the groupings that are inherent in setting them up with the different programs they're in, please let EmpowerDB support know that you want to have this option available, and this will be set for your account. Database administrators will be allowed to set certain items to be visible for users at a certain permission level. So you can say, I want users that are standard users and program administrators and site administrators to be able to see this item. So this means anybody who's reporting only or own clients only would not be able to see this item in their list. So now if all of these kind of different groups of users isn't cutting it for you, it's really something that's very specific to one person or another. You know, let's say legal user 1 is the only person that's ever should be working on restraining orders, then you can select individual users through this list too. And obviously you can select as many as you want. So we're going to go back to this and say legal program for that item. And now it's changed. Legal 209A is only visible for the legal program. So again, I want to stress here that this is only controlling whether these items show up in the list of services here. It does not control whether a service that was added as legal 25080 restraining order is visible for an individual user. Those are completely different permission settings that we'll get into later. But the settings that we were just doing only makes it so that individual users have certain items in their list versus others. This is because, you know, certain services are not appropriate for certain users to be putting in, and you would want to make it so that items in this list do not show up for certain users who it's not appropriate for. The same process can be done for referrals. So this is only visible for the demo user, but all the other referrals are available for all users. Every different type of activity you can do the exact same types of settings for in order to control who's able to see it. All right, let's go to the next example, and that is when you're editing your links that show up on everybody's homepage, you can say, I want this link to all emergency shelters to be visible for all users, but I want the client conflict check to only be visible to users in a legal program. You can click on that link and you can change who's able to see that link. Next thing that you will be impacted by permissions, and that is your custom funder/funder reports. So you might want to say, you know what, the only person that should even be running that LAV report should be people in the legal department. I don't want anybody else even seeing that that report exists. So you would save that, and the permissions have been edited. The last of the simple permission/visibility settings that you would ever want to do is you go to database administration and you look at your information pages. We're going to want to set data completion reminders for this information page. So the first question is going to say use as a data completion reminder. We'll say yes, and reshape our window so that we can see it. Okay. And so now that we've said, yes, I want to use this as a data completion reminder, the database wants to know, okay, who should have it as a data completion reminder? And for this, it's going to, again, look very similar. So maybe a logical thing to do for this one is to say for the shelter intake, I want the residential program 1 and residential program 2 to be reminded to fill out this information page. Save settings, and that's like that. So again, those are the data completion reminders that show up here. So now that I've done that, the database is now reminding me, okay, since you have permission to residential program 1 or residential program 2, you've got to have all that information in for all the shelter intake for all the clients that are active for your account. Okay, so those are just the simple controls that you'll do. So now we'll start getting into some of the more complicated ones. I would definitely say at this point, if you have no interest in doing the complicated permissions, or you're afraid, or it's just not your thing, turn off this video right now. Totally fine. Just make sure EmpowerDB support knows what your needs are as far as permissions of different items in the database. It will be set for your account, and all you have to do is whenever you see a complicated permissions thing like this that you don't understand, just ignore it. It's totally fine. Okay, but for those of you who are interested in learning more, we will proceed. So let's go back to this shelter intake. So for an individual information page, there's these visibility settings to say this page should be visible for clients that are in a specific program, but you can also designate whether this page should be visible for users, for specific users. So it might seem kind of redundant, but this is there's definitely cases where this will be needed. In this case, maybe not so much. So this information page, we're saying, okay, these users have full permission to this information page. They can view it, add it, edit, delete information on it. They can do anything. So the users in residential program 1 and residential program 2. But intern Megan, we want her to be able to view this information page, but we don't want her to be able to add or edit any of the data that's on it. So that's why you would just give her view permissions only. And of course, you could kind of say, we want development team to be able to look at this information page, but not change anything as well. So let's take a look at another example that might be, let's say you had a legal intake page. You could set that intake page to say, I only want, it should be visible for clients in all programs, but I only want the information page to show up for users who are in the legal program. The next permission setting that you might want to take a look at is when we go into the staff list, we can control the permissions of individual activity entries. So when someone is adding in an activity into the database, that activity can either have no special permissions, which means as long as the client that's the activity is added for is visible to a certain user, that means they share the same program, that activity will be able to be visible for to anybody. Or you can say, I want the individual activities added by this user to be fully visible by standard users, program administrators, and site administrators, and not visible to anybody else. So this user has no choice about what they want their activities to be saved as. They will always be saved with this permission level. Or you could also say, I want this user to have a choice. So they get to decide how they want their activities to be designated, what permission level their individual activity permission should have. But the default that always shows up first is this. So this will kind of look like this. So this is a user now that's been set to have a default of only legal programs should be able to view, add, edit, and delete individual activity permissions, and no other user should be able to view this activity that's being entered. Now this legal user could say, all right, I'm working with Amanda. We just did, general personal advocacy for an hour in the main office, and it's actually totally fine for everybody to know that I just did that. There's no conflict of interest of that happening, so I'm going to submit that. So that legal user was able to control how their activities, the permission levels of the activities that they added in. The final setting that you might want to ever do is in the points in time section. So if we go to the points in time section, we can say, let's take a look at individual legal matters that are entered. So for this, we have a little bit more complicated user permission settings. So this first variable describes the permissions for just this entire type of data. So we only want the legal program to ever know that this ever exists, and anybody else can't even see it. So that's what this first variable does. The second variable defines how each individual entry in this type of data is defined with their permissions. So in this case, we only want the legal program to see that this data exists, and for each individual entry, no special permissions. So it's kind of saying, don't need to get any more specific than just saying only legal program can see this information. But let's say there was a point in time like incident of users where you wanted to say, all of the users across the database can see that this type of data exists. But each time an individual entry is added, I want the permissions for that individual entry to be set in a specific way. So this would be, for example, maybe your counseling group and your advocacy group can all see that an incident of user entries are there, but for the counseling group, only the entries that they add should be visible to themselves. Maybe the advocacy group the entries that they add can be visible to everybody. So that's what this second variable does. You can say no special permissions or always the following. So no matter whatever entries get added should be added as counseling. Or you could say the user gets to pick what the permission level should be for each entry that they add. And the default is set as one thing or the other. And the final is the user gets to decide, and I'm going to set the default in the user's record. So if you click this, then you'll have to go back to the staff account for each individual user and say, okay, this person's incident of user point in time entries should have a default of this type of permission level. You'll probably use this more for the really specific example that I just gave. If this part lost you a bit, definitely take a look at this help file for more information about how this all works. All right, good luck with that. Again, if you didn't feel comfortable with any of the more advanced permission settings that were described, definitely don't start clicking buttons. before you contact EmpowerDB support, and definitely glad to help walk you through these very important and admittedly sometimes complicated settings. Thanks.